Welcome to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast, where stories bloom from local flower fields and home gardens. I'm your host, Jennifer Gulizia of the Flowering Farmhouse. I'm a backyard gardener turned flower farmer located in Hood River, Oregon. Join us for heartfelt journeys shared by flower farmers and backyard gardeners. Each episode is like a vibrant garden, cultivating wisdom and joy through flowers. From growing your own backyard garden to supporting your local flower farmer, the Backyard Bouquet is your fertile ground for heartwarming tales and expert cut flower growing advice. All right, flower friends, grab your gardening gloves, garden snips, or your favorite vase because it's time to let your backyard bloom. Welcome back to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Gulizia, and I just want to thank you for tuning in today. I know that summer is in full swing between harvesting, family life, and maybe a few too many weeds, but it means so much that you're here with us today. And if you've been enjoying this show, it would mean the world if you could take a quick second to leave a review or share this episode with a fellow flower farmer or gardener. It's a small way to help more people find the podcast and feel connected to this growing community. Today, I'm joined by Jenny Jonak of Dragonsong Farm in Oregon's Willamette Valley. Jenny is many things. She's a flower farmer, an attorney, a real estate broker, a mom of four, and an elected school board official. At her farm, she grows seasonal flowers using sustainable, no-spray practices. She creates beautiful pressed flower jewelry and brings her flowers to markets and nonprofit events. On our conversation today, we'll be touching on so many topics, from balancing farming with family life to navigating neurodivergence as a business owner to Jenny's recent work advocating for farmers at the state level. She's someone who's deeply invested in her land, her community, and the future of small farms, and I can't wait for you to hear her story. Jenny, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's such an honor. I first heard you speak on the ASCFG on their monthly, I don't know what you call the chats, but it was a forum on solar panels. And it was so educational. I was like, I've got to get her on the podcast sometime. And so
Well,
here we are.
Thank you. I had a lot to learn when I first put those in. So I thought if it could help anybody else, not start from scratch, that would be great.
It was super helpful for us because we're just about to get started on a barn and we're like, how do we incorporate solar? But for today, I wanted to chat with you about your farm. And I know you wear so many different hats between being an attorney, a farmer, a school board chair, and even more. But if we go back to just your farm, can you tell us, how did Dragonsong Farm come to be?
Sure. So I have always loved growing things. I've grown vegetables and fruit for many years. And the flowers originally were just a combination of wanting to have just enough to make some bouquets for myself and family and friends. And also, I wanted to use them to help attract more beneficials and help guard against certain pests. And so I was incorporating flower growing. For example, I love having marigolds with the squash and things like that to ward off squash beetles. And I was growing enough that a friend of mine had suggested I start a CSA. And so I joked that the flowers were going to start pulling their weight and pay for the seeds and the bulbs. And so about, I guess, 3 years ago, I caved and agreed to do a CSA for friends. And I enjoyed it so much that I started getting more and more fascinated with flowers because I love growing anything. But I think with a lot of vegetables, there are only so many different vegetables that you're going to grow. Whereas with flowers, it was this whole new world of so many different species that you could grow. And I love how everything is so different from when you harvest to how you keep them to how you incorporate them. And there was so much specialized knowledge about each one that it I don't know, it was like a rabbit hole that I could go down with all these different types. And I became more and more obsessed with them. And I think one thing led to another. we have a grange that's right around the corner from us, and there's a little farmer's market there. And so a couple of years ago, I started selling at that grange. And then I just wound up with more flowers than that market could really handle. And so I wound up, eventually going to the Lane County Farmers Market, which is the largest market for us around here, and selling there, doing some weddings and other events, continuing the CSA. And I've just loved it. It is a lot of hard work, especially right now in July. It kind of feels like we're drowning in flowers, but I love it, and I'm still fascinated with learning as much as I can about them.
So you started out as a vegetable farmer.
Yes. And I would say maybe farmer is probably the wrong word for that. I was really more of a gardener. I wasn't doing it commercially.
Gotcha. So it was the flowers that launched your farm.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think also because with flowers, I mean, you can have a much smaller amount of land and be able to grow commercially, whereas with vegetables and fruit, quite often, you're looking at larger parcels and larger scale operations.
Totally. So how much land are you growing on?
So right now it's about an acre, maybe a little bit more than that. We have 80 acres. So we keep most of it is wooded, and we're committed to never ever clear cutting. The property across the street from us has done that, and it's their right to do that. But we believe pretty strongly in trying to preserve as much as possible. So we have kept the rest in like natural pasture and meadow. We don't spray anything. And the goal is really, we've got some natural water features on the property. There's a small tributary to a stream that runs through the property, and there is a pond on the property. And so our goal is really to make sure that nothing is getting into the water table, and we're trying to preserve as much of the natural ecosystem as possible.
Amazing. 80 acres is a lot to steward.
It is a lot. It is a lot, especially when you have Himalayan blackberry on it. That's a whole
Oh,
fight in and of itself.
well, I know this wasn't one of my questions that I sent to you, but do you have any tips on the blackberries? Because we have them covering our property.
Yeah, it's really tough. For ours, especially in the tree growth areas, we also have native poison oak. So you have to be really careful because we've we had one person that we hired to try to clear out some of the blackberry, and he wound up, I guess it was so big he used a chainsaw, and some of it aerosolized and got into his lungs, and so he wound up in the hospital for 2 weeks. So
Oh,
he would never
no.
work in the wooded areas again. So I don't know that we have a great system for that. I think in a perfect world, you'd probably have goats, and you would probably, I don't know, use them. There really aren't services around us that have goats available that could handle our land. There's really only one person who does it. It's very small scale. So I suppose if we had more time and energy, we would have our own goats, but we're trying to not add on additional farming responsibilities.
Of course. Tell us, what does the name dragon mean? Or dragon song? What's the inspiration behind that?
Oh, so, when I first started looking into this, we have little kids, and it was during the pandemic. There was a period of time where the Oregon, at least in our area, the schools essentially, shut down physically. So kids were learning from home. And in our case, there really wasn't a great setup. And so we found ourselves homeschooling our kids for about 6 months. And I was trying to, come up with a curriculum for them. So we had like literature and science, and part of it was really fun. We would go out, we would take a microscope, we would get pond samples, we came up with all kinds of experiments. And one of the things that I read with the kids was Tolkien. And so when they were first talking to me about having a little farm stand, and this was before the flower farm actually, they wanted to put out some extra strawberries and fava beans and things like that. We decided to call it Dragonsong Farm. And we wound up building this farm stand that has these little carved dragon heads on the end. Now, when we switched to flowers, we actually didn't use that stand anymore because it doesn't have enough shade. But we kept the name, and the kids liked that name a lot.
I love that. How old are your kids?
So I have a wide range. I've got a 33-year-old as my oldest, and she is on her own at this point in Washington and also loves gardening. And I've got a 14-year-old, 12-year-old, and 9-year-old.
You're a busy mom. So they were really little during COVID.
Yes, they were. It was, I purposely had never homeschooled because I didn't think I would be very good at it, but it was actually kind of fun, seeing some of the different resources and learning about it and I have friends that homeschool, so they would give me some resources to use and I didn't realize you weren't supposed to do tests or quizzes during homeschool, so we wound up doing those as well on history and science and things like that.
Oh, how funny. I homeschooled my daughter as she was entering kindergarten in COVID, and I was a terrible homeschooler. I was so excited to put her back in public schools. I have a lot of respect for parents that can homeschool. It's not easy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when it's more treated like a college course where you give them the text and they write an essay, that part's really fun. But when it comes to like teaching literacy or something like that really wasn't something I had a good skill set for.
Totally. We did a lot of hands-on, like you were saying, but ours was like in the wintertime, we were baking and picking flowers. And I mean, it was kindergarten. What are you supposed to do when you're home?
Yeah, that's really fun.
So, when you started out, Jenny, with the flowers, what was the first piece of your business? Like, what did your flower farm look like in the early days? You had the CSA.
Well, I didn't have a cooler, and so that was really difficult, and I've read that having a flower farm without a cooler is like running a restaurant without a kitchen, and I think that's actually true.
So true.
Because it makes you so dependent on having to move your flowers exactly when you're harvesting them, which is really tough. So I would say that was probably my biggest challenge. In terms of infrastructure, the land that we purchased, the folks there had horses, but there was really no other infrastructure. And so, I mean, even part of the reason I got into solar is because there wasn't even electrical where we wound up, putting most of the flower plantings in the garden areas. There wasn't deer fencing. We had to drill a new well for irrigation. We had to put in all the irrigation drip infrastructure. Had to learn about the soil types. So it was quite a bit. And we now have a couple of hoop houses, extensive deer fencing, lots of raised beds. But starting from scratch was kind of fun and also kind of daunting.
I can relate to all of that. As soon as our call ends today, I have a repair person coming to fix my cooler. We moved farm locations this last year. So I'm just starting to harvest, and I harvested my first order. I turned on the cooler and I come back and it's frozen over. And I learned the hard
No.
way. And so now this whole last week, I've only been able to harvest on demand because I can't store them. I have nowhere to put my flowers. And I'm like, okay, lesson learned. Always have a backup AC unit because my AC, and I've got an electrical piece on the CoolBot that went out that's supposed to be arriving, I think, by 2 o'clock today. And I'm like, this delivery can't come soon enough.
Yes, I think that's definitely I had a cooler malfunction earlier this year and was really surprised to learn that anywhere in the state of Oregon, it takes you about a week to get a large size AC that can power a cooler with a CoolBot. And so since then, I keep one on hand and I keep an extra CoolBot on hand with the idea that, at least if it breaks, hopefully it's only 24 hours.
Totally. That's so smart. I've always heard people say keep an extra AC unit on hand. And I'm like, oh, I'll know when it's starting to go out.
Yeah.
And there was no warning sign. It just went out.
Yeah, we had another local flower farmer who had the same situation and she had posted, does anybody have an extra AC unit for a CoolBot? And amazingly I did. It was still new in the box, the backup that I bought. And she wound up ultimately not needing it, but it was also nice because I think if you have that and someone else's goes out, to be able to pitch in is great because I think farming is really hard work and it's so important for flower farmers to support one another as much as possible.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. I love that you were able to help someone else when they were needing it too. That's awesome. I mean, I know you said she didn't end up needing it, but just
Well,
just be able to
I did that
offer.
gimmick, like, you have an entire cooler. So when our cooler went down for about 24 hours, of course, I had probably 2,000 peonies stored in it.
Oh,
And so at a certain point, you just, like, learn to let your breath out and think, "Okay, Flowers are by definition, they are a fleeting thing. Part of what, it's the transience that adds to the beauty. And so I just was trying to put myself in that mindset that this may happen. I'll have more flowers. There's always next year. But part of the reason I was excited to store that many peonies is I was trying different storage methods and I plan to, pull them out at different stages and see how long the vase life is with each different storage method. So next year I'll be a little more prepared on the best way to store them.
Oh gosh. I'm curious, what are the methods you're trying?
Yeah, so one of them is basically wrapping them in saran wrap, which isn't my favorite because it uses up a lot of plastic wrap and it's actually kind of a pain. Another one, I wrap them in newspaper. Another method I did was to basically combine the two. I also tried like doing the saran wrap and then or newspaper and then putting them in kind of a plastic garbage sack. And so I'm taking notes on everything and seeing how long they last. I pulled out one shipment for an event this weekend and I kept those vases afterwards so I can see how much longer are you going to last? Are you going to last 6 days? Or are you going to last 3 days? So whether it's usable for an event versus actual vase life for a bouquet.
That's awesome that you're doing that. Have you found any evidence of one working better than the other yet, or you need to wait because
Well,
they're
I'm
cooler?
already a big fan of the newspaper versus the saran wrap, partly because I hate using that single-use plastic as much as possible, and also it's really kind of a pain to wrap them in saran wrap.
That would take so long. Were you wrapping each individual one in saran wrap or as a
No,
bunch?
I would bunch them and then do it, and I had my girls pitch in, and they say they're kind of scarred, no longer like peonies because we had so many all at once with the really hot spring we had, and so we have this ping pong table behind our barn, and literally the entire ping pong table was just stacked about 3 feet high with peony stems.
Oh my gosh. How many
It was
peony
so
plants
many.
do you have?
I have about 600 peonies.
Wow. Did you plant all of those when you went all in on flower farming?
Yes. Yes. I usually like when I get really interested in something, I kind of just dive in wholeheartedly. And peonies are something I've always loved anyway.
So was this your first year that you were able to harvest from them?
It is. It was my first year.
Okay. But were you able to save most of them, or did you lose a lot of them with the cooler malfunction?
I would say some of them were probably only event quality, which again is another thing where I think events are really, really useful because a lot of times as flower farmers, we have flowers that still have some vase life left to them. They don't have a week left, so you're hesitant to sell them to a customer for that purpose, but they are perfect for events.
That's such a great point. So now in your business, you're doing events, it sounds like. Are you still doing your CSA?
I'm still doing my CSA. I don't do a ton of events, but I like to pick and choose the ones. I do less weddings now, mostly because I there are some things I really love about events. I love how you can be creative on a larger scale than usual. I mean, I love doing arches, for example. I was super stressed when I had to do my first arch because you often do it on site. So it's a little nerve-wracking because if it doesn't turn out, you worry that you've ruined someone's event. But it is a lot of fun because you can just really be large scale. So I actually love doing arches and huge floral arrangements and things like that. But I've really kind of gravitated towards nonprofit events, partly because I think they're more flexible if you're growing everything. A lot of times with weddings, like I had a wedding last June and it was a wonderful couple, and I really liked them. Their palette was only blue and purple. So it was challenging because it was a time period in June, which is your low season. And I was so paranoid about whether I would have a lot of blue and purple. And so I wound up planting all these things to have a variety of blue and purple. And now, of course, I found that I like a lot of them. So I have more blue and purple than a lot of the flower farmers around here. But it was stressful, having to have only things within that particular color palette at that particular time. So with nonprofit events, I really like that they are usually willing to take whatever you have seasonally. And it's a great way to use those blooms that you maybe haven't sold some other way, but can still create some beauty for something. And it's for a great cause.
Totally. So when you talk about nonprofit events, are you giving away these flowers or they're still hiring you to do the work?
They're usually hiring me. I've done both, but usually I try really hard not to undercut other flower farmers or florists. So I do charge what I think is a fair market rate for whatever I do. Occasionally, if it's some cause that just truly can't afford it and it would be they would have nothing otherwise, I may consider it, but most of the time I'm charging a market rate. Um, and usually it's something that is giving back to the community. It's a food bank, or it might be something that, there was one event that supports breastfeeding mothers and connects them with resources. There was one that provides like postpartum depression resources for moms. And there are probably, some arts organizations, things like that.
I love that. That's awesome. So you're doing your CSA, the nonprofits, and then you have pressed flower jewelry. Is that right?
Yes, yes. Well, my biggest outlet is probably the farmer's market. But then
Okay.
I started thinking about a lot of the flower farms around us do dried flower wreaths and bouquets, and they're beautiful. So I tried that last year and I started drying some flowers, and I found that they're hard to transport because they're very fragile. So it's
Mhm.
it's very easy to break something. So I started trying to think of ways that I could preserve that moment in time with a flower. And I was also trying to brainstorm a lot of times when you sell at a market, you are very dependent on the people who live locally, because if someone is a visitor or a tourist, they're unlikely to buy fresh flowers. And so I was trying to think of something that somebody could buy that was small that they could take with them. So if we have an event in Eugene, for example, like we have like the World Track and Field Championships coming up, or maybe it's the qualifying. I don't know. I should, but we have these athletic events. We have like the University of Oregon graduation. We have a lot of things that bring in tourists that often can't buy fresh flowers, but they want to get something at the market. And so I was thinking, pressed flower jewelry would be something small, and it would be something that can expand your customer base, because you are able to also sell to people who aren't necessarily local.
That's
And
such
that's
a
been that's been it's been successful. I've really liked it. I enjoy it. I think one of the things I like the most about it is that for most of my bouquets, I'm really focused on the big, focal flowers. So dahlias and peonies and ranunculus and things like that. And with the pressed flower jewelry, a lot of times you want something that's really small. So you can grow an incredible amount for jewelry in a tiny space, because you're using things like pansies or geum or little daisies, or maybe even some herbs and things like that.
That's awesome. So you harvest the flowers, you dry them, and then you put them into jewelry. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I harvest them and I press them, and not all presses are created equal. I really like, I think it's called the August press. She recently, I think for ASCFG, did a workshop on pressed flowers, and she's known for pressed flowers, and she has her own press made of birch,
Oh,
and it's got layers of felt in between, and I can just use regular paper, which is really nice, that I can reuse. And that press has worked really well. And you can tell the difference because you usually will press for 2 or 3 weeks. And if you don't have enough pressure on your press, what you're going to find is that the flower, you might not get as much color. It won't be perfectly flat. It will look almost a little shriveled, as opposed to more like what it looked like going in, except that dried color.
fascinating. Well, I'll have to get the link from you for that
Yes,
flower
it's a lot of
press,
fun.
and then we can share that in the show notes today.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I've done it in other ways too. I also have done it in frames, to kind of create like a picture, but those are a lot more difficult to bring to market. So the jewelry has really been nice because I can fit, a huge amount of jewelry in a shoebox and just take it with me in my cargo van, and it takes up almost no room.
That's awesome. I love that idea. That's such a creative use. I mean, it just shows how many different avenues local flowers can be moved. Because, like, you hear about local flowers and you first think, oh, a CSA or wedding flowers, but there's pressed art jewelry, like you just said. And then even with pressed flowers, there's the frame prints or there's jewelry. I mean, there's,
People do coasters, they do all sorts of things with them. For me, I just wound up picking something that was small and easy to transport for the final product, but it's a lot of fun. I don't think it's that difficult to learn or to work with. And it was something that I didn't feel like I was undercutting any of the other flower farmers because nobody else was doing it.
that's such a great thing. Like when you talk about a niche market, that's so specialized and different than everyone else that I'm sure the market loves it too. Are you getting positive feedback? And
We get really positive feedback, so that's been great. And I think I was the first person at our farmers market to do it, so I had to go through the approval process, and you have to, tell them your suppliers and what percentage is the grown product and things like that.
interesting. So the market actually is tracking what percentage of the product is
Yeah, so
coming.
with something fresh like our flower bouquets, 100% have to be grown by us, and I really like that challenge because I think if it's something like 25 or 50%, I don't know, that's really not the same. And so it really forces you to think as a flower farmer about all the different aspects of things that go into a bouquet. With things that, are more of a finished product, it's not possible. So for example, if someone's selling jam, they're obviously probably not glass blowing their own jars and things like that. And
Sure.
so the jewelry was the same. They were okay, the chain, for example, I don't make the chains. I'm not a blacksmith. So they want to make sure that it's a minimum of 25% that comes from product that you have grown on your farm.
Okay. That makes
And you
sense.
have to show pictures and your volume calculate, however you came up to prove that it was at least 25%.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So let's talk about a little your farmers market a little bit because it sounds like you said it's the biggest part of your business, so it's obviously very successful for you.
I love our farmers market. It has really good management, and you really appreciate that if you've done different markets. I think their advertising is great. They're really consistent. They have like a, intricate set of rules that they go over with every single farmer. So, you've really got consistency. And they're usually always trying to rethink, how can we get better exposure for the farmers? So, this past year, for example, they redid the layout at the market. And it was really nice because the way they redid it, a lot more of us now had more of a corner setup, which is terrific because it enables you to show off a lot more product in the same amount of space.
Oh, that's really neat. So I wasn't even thinking about that, but our market only has a few corner spots, but that does make a big difference if you have two sides of your booth to be able to show.
Yeah, they started basically doing them all on like little islands so that basically, it probably tripled or quadrupled the amount of corner spaces. And, if you've ever been like right next to somebody else, I mean, now it feels much more spacious because you're also not butting up right against another vendor who, no matter how much you like, it means that you have to keep your product back a little more.
Sure. Oh, that's really neat. Tell us a little bit about your setup and how you successfully run your farmers market, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. So I think for me, I always really like to make sure the product holds well at the market. And so shade, I think, is really important if you're a flower farmer. And so two things I would recommend for anyone doing a market is, we have easy up canopies or the equivalent that almost everybody uses. A lot of the flower farmers, I think virtually all of them have easy up canopies, which was a product I hadn't seen before, but it basically cantilevers off of the easy up legs and just creates, you know, a couple more feet of shade, which is important because you can then keep your tables right at the edges of your booth, but your products are still in shade. I also bring an umbrella with a base. So as the sun moves, I have something that's really easy to move to make sure that everything's always in shade.
Oh, that's a good idea.
If it's really hot, I will bring a cooler of ice and add ice to the buckets as the day goes on, just to try to keep things cool. Um, Other than that, I would say with farmers market, it's a very different aesthetic than growing for weddings. And so I think if you're a flower farmer, unless you're really large, you kind of have to. For me, I had to try a bunch of different things to see what I liked best. But farmers market if you're just bringing pastels to farmers market, you're going to have a pretty limited number of buyers. Bright colors are really what draw people in. And so if you're growing for market, I think that's probably important. Think about your bright colors. So when I'm crop planning for the next year, I'm thinking about, okay, not just what particular species of flowers I'm going to grow, but what are my intended outlets? And so what are my color combinations going to be? And what the particular flower is, I'm not that particular about recipes that way, but I do pay attention to what colors am I going to use? What are other farmers at the market doing and combining that are different than I am? And what am I doing differently? And how do I keep that up? And so I think it's a combination of what you enjoy growing as well as what makes you stand out at the market.
I like that idea, the mentality of what's going to make me stand out. And the bright colors is such a spot on thing because I remember I used to only grow pastels because I was selling for weddings and I did a community table at the market and I barely sold anything, but it was all the like whites and blushes. And
Yeah.
people were like, well, do you have anything brighter? And I'm like, what do you mean? These are gorgeous, but it's not the
Yeah.
same customer.
Yeah. So, for example, I love Lysianthus. It's one of my absolute favorite flowers. And it sells okay at market. But I mean, I remember the first time last year when I had all this Lysianthus and I thought, oh my gosh, this is just going to run out the door. Wallets are going to jump out of people's pockets for these. And it's not, because it's more of a wedding flower. And I think some people at market like it, but less, I would say. I would say also for market, I think making sure that you're not undercutting other flower farmers, because if you are pricing really low, of course you're going to sell, but at what cost? You're really undervaluing your entire market. And so I think really trying to figure out, how much do these things cost? How much labor is going into this? And what's a fair price that's fair to me as well as to the customer? And trying to take that into account and really look at that. And so one thing I've looked at is, how can I create farmers market bouquets with less labor? And I can't remember if it's Lenny Larkin or somebody else that's talked about reducing the number of different flower species you grow. And that's helped a lot between this year and last year. So instead of growing, 60 or 70 different types of flowers, I now keep a sheet which is called my focus flowers. And for each month, I have, literally just 2 to 3. These are the focus flowers. And I'm really focused on that. And my goal is to create mixed bouquets that have a limited number of different types of flowers in them. Because if you're doing mixed bouquets that have 10 or 12 different flowers, it's going to take you a lot of labor to put that together. And I particularly love things that will sell at market in straight bunches. I know in a lot of parts of the country, you can sell almost everything in straight bunches, but at our market, it's really competitive for flower farmers. We have a lot of fantastic flower farms. And so mixed bouquets are kind of a must for probably 80% of what we sell. So I'm always interested in, dahlias, for example, look different enough that you can just have straight bunches of dahlias and people are pretty happy with that. But there are only probably a half dozen things that I think will sell in straight bunches as well at our market. So just trying to think about what are things that I can grow that will sell in straight bunches, because that will reduce my labor and time. And if not, what are combinations that I can put together quickly in bouquets?
That's such great advice. When you talk about the standalone flowers, what flowers besides dahlias do well for you at the market that you don't
So,
bunch?
ranunculus, for example, I think that's probably hands down the most popular flower I grow. People, if you're going to grow pastels, spring actually can accommodate a fair number of pastels. The more you go on through the year, the more you need the brighter colors. And in fall, people really gravitate towards those pumpkin and fall colors. And so learning that also helped a lot with crop planning. So, for example, for mums, I love some of the beautiful, like, lavender heirloom mums and things like that. But you really want your bread and butter mums for November to be Thanksgiving type colors if you want to sell bouquets. So I would say, in terms of straight bunches, things that sell well would be dahlias, peonies, Lysianthus to some extent, ranunculus, tulips. Those are the ones right off the top of my head.
So the focal flowers
Yeah.
primarily.
Yeah,
That's
so I
great.
love scoop scabiosa, for example, but I haven't had a single customer that seems really excited about it yet. So that's one that I trialed this year, but I'm not sure if I'll grow it again because I love it, but the stems are thin enough that to get the volume, I have to put a fair number in, and the plugs are fairly expensive. So if customers aren't really excited about it, then I have to think, is that space better dedicated to something else? And one thing I do is towards the end of the summer, I send out a survey link to all my customers and I ask them and I tell them, "Hey, I'm starting to crop plan for next year. I would really love for you to share with me what was the most exciting to you? What did you like? What did you not like?" And I create a survey where they rank different things. And I can really get a sense on a scale of like 1 to 10, how much did you like this flower, that flower? And I'll put pictures because people might not remember what the flower is.
That's
And that's been
brilliant.
hugely helpful too.
I love that. Are you collecting names and emails at the farmer's market, or is that just your CSA?
Don't. It's been kind of organic. So, and for when they sign up for a CSA, they go on our mailing list. And then on the website, we have a mailing list sign up. And then other than that, people will hear about it through Facebook or Instagram, but I don't keep like a list at market itself.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that. Uh,
Sure.
that was a lot of really great advice on the farmers markets. I loved your tip about bringing a cooler of ice also, because sometimes it gets so hot, and the last thing you want is your flowers to start looking like they're
Yeah,
wilting
it's
at the end of
awful.
the day.
Yeah, and I would say bring snips, and if something looks wilty, it is actually better for your bouquet to have one less flower than to have a bouquet that seems tainted because it's got one wilted flower in it.
Totally, that's a great idea. Are you finding that you do best with a wrapped bouquet, or are you selling them in vases? What works best for your presentation of them?
My first year I did vases and it was such a pain to transport, and so I vowed never again, and I've pretty much stuck to that. I do wrapped bouquets and I wrap them in paper, transport them in a bucket. I have the smallest size of cargo van that you can have because I don't like driving big vehicles that much. And so for me, the key is each bucket has to be at least $150 of value at the market, sales value. And so I really think focusing on like how much value can I put in this bucket, whether you're selling $15 bouquets or 25 or 30 or 40, making sure that you're not bringing a bucket that, for example, is worth $75 because that's kind of a waste of space if you can only fit a certain number of buckets in your van.
That's a great mentality. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, sure.
Okay, let's talk about some of your legislative advocacy that you've done. I know that you've been active, especially around water rights and land access for farmers. Can you share more about that and why this matters?
Sure. So we, starting about 2 years ago in Lane County, our water master here decided to send out some enforcement letters to various small farms. I can't remember how many were targeted, maybe 30, 33 farms. And I know a couple of them, including one that had to shut down her farm.
Oh, wow.
And she was using about 1,000 gallons a day, half an acre. She was growing mostly food and she had a farm stand and a CSA, and she was feeding, I don't know, dozens of families off that half acre. It was not a lot of water. And learning about that and starting to read about the actual, water rights laws made me super surprised. And I think a lot of people probably don't realize there are a few things that are unique about Oregon. We have a system where if I have a swimming pool, I can fill up the swimming pool, I can drain it 2 days later, I can fill it up again. I can use 15,000 gallons a day. And for a commercial use like a car wash or anything like that, I can use 5,000 gallons a day. If I have livestock, I can use an unlimited amount. But if I grow fruits or vegetables or flowers, I am not allowed to irrigate that for commercial purposes at all. This was the law as it existed before this most recent legislative session.
This is
So
if
it
you
was
have a well, correct? Or is this
that's
any
correct.
water?
So if you were on the city water system, you would be fine. But most people farming are going to be on wells.
Right.
And so this would be for exempt wells. You could use it for all these other purposes. So for example, if I wanted to start a dairy farm, I could use, 1 million gallons a day. There's no limit on it. But there, as the law existed before this most recent legislative session, I could grow fruits and vegetables and irrigate up to half an acre, but I couldn't sell any of them. The minute I sold any of them, I was in violation of the law. And so it was Friends for Family Farmers, which I think is such a terrific organization. They had a legislative committee that they were seeking farmer members for. So I volunteered to do that, and I have worked on that for the past year, and I've really loved it. It's probably one of the most rewarding, nonprofit things that I do. And what they do is they really try to amplify the voice of small farms. And we know that large farms already have a voice through the Farm Bureau, but there was really not a lot of voice from small farmers. And so they work on trying to make sure that that voice gets integrated into the legislative process. And I know, for example, farm stands has been a recent, controversy. Land access in general, I think, is really tough for farmers. And I have a real estate broker's license. I've had one for over 15 years. And I've worked with clients who look for farm property. And it's very difficult because very few properties come with groundwater rights. And there are even the ones that have water rights, many of them are never sold on the open market. So we know that, farming is an extremely capital intensive profession. And
Yes.
so it's not surprising that a lot of times it winds up being generational. A lot of people, their father, their parents, their grandparents were farmers because otherwise who could afford the land, the tractors, all that infrastructure is incredibly expensive. And there's no real way to make it pencil out. And so if you're a younger farmer trying to get into into farming, you're really it's very, very difficult if you don't essentially inherit those things or have some way to access them affordably. And as real estate prices have gone up, land has gone up, and it's gone up. I think Friends of Family Farmers has said like triple. I think farmland here is has tripled in price compared to the national average. And so I think it makes it difficult. And one thing that surprised me is that we talk a lot about planning, with how subdivisions are going to work and zoning and things like that. But there aren't usually many discussions that local elected or governmental groups have about where's our local food going to come from and how do we plan for that. That's usually not a question that I'm hearing. So I think trying to keep it accessible and make sure that the next generation of farmers can actually get into it is really important. I guess, some of the other things that I was fascinated to learn is 88% of all wells in Oregon account for only 4% of water usage. So we're talking about, a lot of these exempt domestic wells in the country that are really using a very modest amount of water. 82% of our groundwater is used by irrigated agriculture, which is the large farms with water rights, although they only make up 7% of wells. So I think one thing that we need to look at is we've got, in some ways, I think, a very antiquated water system where we have use it or lose it. And so we have these big farms that a lot of times were granted water rights in a time period where they just issued huge water rights. So the average irrigation is maybe an inch. They might be have given they might have been given water rights that would be, a foot or a foot and a half as opposed to an inch. And so they wind up having, that's why sometimes you just see these overhead like flood irrigation systems. And it's a system where I think it's very problematic in a lot of ways because we haven't really prioritized as a state what water uses are the most important for Oregonians? Is it important for me to be able to fill my swimming pool, or is it more important for me to be able to grow food to feed the community? Because right now there's more leeway given to the swimming pool with exempt domestic wells.
That's crazy. I had no idea about that part. We are in a unique situation here in Hood River because we have an irrigation district, and all sizes of properties that fall on farming land have access. So, like my last property where I leased
That's
land,
terrific.
we had it, but it is like lose it or use it or lose it. Because when we were in our search for properties, we found one parcel that was actually really affordable. But the reason it was affordable was because 20 years ago, the owners had given up their water rights. So the property had no water access. And
Mhm.
we were like, oh, well, we're not going for that. But we have 17 and a half acres of water rights. They do it by acreage. And then I think there's a water amount also. And I don't know what ours is. You mentioned a water master. For those
Yes.
listening, can you explain what a water master is? 'Cause I think a lot of people probably
Sure.
aren't familiar with that.
Sure. So each different county and several counties may be combined. There are water masters throughout the state, and the water master is the person who basically oversees water use within a particular. So ours, for example, I think does Lane County, Lynn County, and Benton County. And that person would be responsible for overseeing enforcement of the water laws, as well as, let's say, for example, a lot of water rights are surface water rights at the individual level. And so let's say that it's an unusually dry year and there's not as much water in that surface reservoir as there usually is. The water master would be responsible for, you know, working with others to make sure that that amount of water doesn't exceed what is healthy for for the surface waters. And so sometimes that may involve having to say, hey, you, even though you have water rights, you're going to be restricted in this particular month. And so what comes into play there is whether you've got what's called senior water rights or junior water rights. And senior water rights, which are also referred to as like the good water rights, were granted in Oregon prior to 1955. And so if you have water rights from before 1955, you usually those are the best water rights, not just because they tended to also have be much more generous, but because you will take seniority. So if there's a really dry year, then water will be restricted in reverse order of when you got the water rights. So the person who got it in say 1950 will take seniority over someone who got it in 1980.
Interesting.
And the water rights travel with the property, not with the person.
Gotcha. Okay. We've been learning a little bit about Oregon water masters and water rights on our new property because across the river is Washington. We're on the border of Oregon and Washington here.
Yes.
And a lot of contractors in our area come from Washington. And we know people that do these amazing ponds. And in Washington, you can just build a pond. But in Oregon, you have to get approval from the water master of your area. And we want to build a pond because we have such terrible, terrible drainage that we have like pooling water for
Mhm.
about 9 months of the year on certain parts of our property where we can't do anything. We can't even build on our property until we figure out some of the drainage issues. And I can't get our local water master to call me back yet. But I had no
Oh
idea
no.
that you have to actually have approval from the water master to be able to even put a pond in Oregon.
Yeah, and I suspect with some counties you may need multiple approvals as well. So that gets really tricky. There are definitely people here who have started to put in irrigation ponds, and there are different rules. I think our water master has what I'm told is a slightly different interpretation of some of that. So that's interesting. I mean, we have, I think, a pond that is seasonal.
Okay.
It's full most of the year. It's a little less than 2 acres, so it's a very large pond
Wow.
that was built as an irrigation pond in the 1950s or 60s. So one thing we are will be applying for is permission to be able to use that, but we wound up just trying to look at water resilience in several different ways. So we have a rainwater catchment system that feeds into an underground cistern. and we'll be acquiring additional tanks. But you can put those rainwater catchment systems off any metal roof. And also, you can actually build them off high tunnel roofs too.
Oh, interesting.
But it's the storage that is so incredibly expensive.
Yes.
But I think, going back to the water rights, I mean, one thing that is really interesting to me, I'm Korean American. So I always find it really kind of fascinating that, when Oregon became a state, which was 1859, if you were of Asian descent or Black descent, you could not own real estate. That was the law.
Seriously?
And seriously, and you had alien land laws that prevented Asians on the West Coast from purchasing or leasing land from 1913 until the end of World War II. After that, you had redlining. So you had a lot of obstacles in place where anyone of color had a really hard time even accessing land. And so to me, there's something really questionable about having a first in time water rights system that's established during a time period when a non white could not easily own land or access land. Like if you had that in any other part of our land system, like say for example in land ownership of residential property or tenancy property, that would have a huge impact. And we do see some impact where to this day, I think 95% of farmers identify as white. You've got less than 2% are Black, less than 1% are Asian American. And I think unless we create ways to access water, you're going to see some of those discrepancies continue because farming is so generational.
It really is. It's especially around where I live. There's so many third and fourth and fifth and even 6 year generational farms. But I think even some of those are struggling now with
Yeah,
some
I
of
mean, there's a
Oregon laws.
struggle across, definitely. There's a struggle across the board where I think we need to think about how our political systems can take into account the needs of farmers. But then I think we also have to think about how do young farmers, how do first generation farmers access what they need to have a successful farm. And
Do
so
you have
that's why I'm so fascinated by, land access, water rights, and just the legislative process with advocacy.
I love that. Thank you for all of your wisdom and what you've shared here. For those that are listening that are newer to farming or land ownership, what is one thing that they really need to understand about the water access or land use?
I think before you purchase a piece of property, making sure that you understand what the rights are, what are its zoning. If you plan to have a farm stand, are you allowed to put one on there? If you want to have a barn, are you able to build it? And I will say that most of the people working, in water master departments or just the building departments, they want to help you. And so before you rent or purchase a piece of farmland, go down to the department and ask them, what are the things you can do and not do? What are your plans? And they can help guide you through that. Friends of Family Farmers also has some amazing resources for people looking to buy or rent land. I think they have a whole division of people that help connect farmers with land resources.
That's just if you're in Oregon, though. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. I know it is in Oregon. I don't know if it goes beyond that. I think you're probably right.
Okay. I know the has lots of resources available for people that are
They
looking.
do, they do. NCRS is really great. We have like the Rogue Farm Corps. We have so many different nonprofits that really help connect farmers, especially disadvantaged farmers or beginning farmers with different resources. NCRS was that the National Conservation they are terrific. Every single county I think has one of those offices or has some personnel, and they can also like show up on site, walk your land, and tell you, about different resources that they might be able to connect you with.
Thank you for sharing that. In our conversations, as we were emailing back and forth before, as we were preparing for this episode, you mentioned being neurodivergent and that many other farmers likely are as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it has helped you with the way you structure your farm and your business?
Sure. I think this came up at some point during a farm. get together that I went to, and someone else was talking about being neurodivergent and was referencing surveys showing the high level of neurodivergence among farmers, which makes sense in a way because a lot of times professions that are self-employed often will attract neurodivergent personalities. And for myself, I have autism and ADHD, which is kind of a weird combination because some of the things seem at odds with each other. And it definitely, the ADHD is probably why I like doing a million different things at once. And it probably also is why I just like to jump full into something. I find that organizational systems, if you have any of that type of personality, are really, really important. So I have made the mistake before, for example, of purchasing the same set of plugs multiple times because I didn't keep track enough to realize that I'd already ordered all these delphinium plugs. So I think coming up with an organizational system for what you're going to do in advance and really trying to stick with it, for me, that's been really important. So I have a spreadsheet that I track all of our different sales from all the different outlets, and that's been really helpful for markets from one year to another. So I can track, here's how much was sold last year, so here's how much I'm likely to have to do. I think having some sort of routines where for example, if your market's on Saturday, that Friday you're probably going to be making bouquets, knowing what your harvest days are. If you set up a CSA, setting it up at the opposite time of the week so you don't have everything coming in at once is really good. If you are autistic or introverted or, have any of a number of other different neurodivergences, you probably want to be conscious of the fact that working with people, especially in an outward facing role such as farmers market, is going to be potentially more tiring for you than a neurotypical person. And so you probably want to build that in. I think it's probably one reason as well that I wound up preferring nonprofit events to weddings, because I think with weddings, you really have to be a lot more outward facing and have a lot of different meetings with brides. And that for me was probably a little bit overwhelming. So I think trying to think of, what are the parts that you struggle with and trying to find systems, or maybe it's even people. Maybe you're hiring somebody who's a really terrific salesperson who can then do that part of the business for you. But
I
I
love
think being conscious of it is good, and I think being conscious of it in a way that doesn't attach to any particular kind of stigma, because we know that among women in particular, for example, a lot of women went undiagnosed for a long time because a lot of what we think of as ADHD or autism was based on male models. And so I think understanding yourself so that you can be more sympathetic to yourself and give yourself a break and really try to work with what you do best.
I love that advice. That's so important for us to all give ourselves grace, I think,
Yeah.
especially so many people who are probably listening to this podcast are either a one person show or they have maybe a small skeleton crew helping them. There's very few flower farmers, I think, that have a full team unless they're growing on a large scale, because so many people, especially listening to this podcast, are growing on a quarter acre, a half acre, or maybe just their backyard and trying to do it all themselves. And like you said, I was laughing when you mentioned the delphiniums because the other day I was going through this time of year. I always look at my seeds that I need to order for the next year. And I found like 10 packets of the same seeds. And I'm like,
Yeah.
from 10 different sources, I'm like, why did I order the same thing? And now I've got a system in place where I track what I'm ordering. But back then I didn't. And it leads to this overwhelm or unnecessary spending or burnout. So that was great advice about creating those structures and systems, because I'm definitely like you. I'm going 5 million miles a minute and doing too many things at once. And I think we used to think that was like a good thing, but now it's like, okay, how do I kind of scale back? And Lenny actually told me, she was like, pick 3 things this year, Jen, and get really good at those and get systems in place for those 3 things instead of trying to do so much at once that I'm going to not do anything well.
I think that's good. I mean, I think that like breaking things into smaller chunks, I think I've heard the say you can do it all, you just can't do it all at the same time. is really
Yes.
good advice. And so figuring out, okay, this year, I really want to. So, for example, for this year, I had like 3 focus crops that I wanted to get better at. Like dahlias was one of them. I was like, darn it, I'm going to master dahlias. And last year, ranunculus was the big thing I wanted to focus on. But also, it can be putting those types of systems in place. And yeah, I mean, I will say Farmer Bailey's been so nice at me having to email and saying, "I'm sorry I ordered the delphinium 3 times. Can I please cancel or change it out with this thing?" So you're absolutely right. Like having those kinds of systems in place will save you time and money. And a lot of flower farms that I know are really great at seeding crops, and I think that's fabulous. It'll save you so much money. But sometimes the organization required to add that on to be able to seed something and have your plugs ready by a particular time, if that's not something that you're at that stage, I think get the plugs. Don't stress about it. It doesn't mean you're not a real farmer. And figure out what works for you. I'm not that great at succession seeding. It's one of the things I struggle with the most. And so just knowing that, recognizing it, and building that into your crop system is good.
I love that advice. This year, I actually ordered a lot more plugs than I ever have because I had a smaller greenhouse with our move. And I was like, I'm either going to be limited to how much I can grow because I can only have space for so many seed trays, or I can order in the plugs and not having to baby some of these seeds for
Yeah,
8 or 10 weeks. I have so much more planted by myself. My husband even said, "How'd you get so much planted this year?" I was like, well, ordering in plugs saved me so much time and energy that versus that $7 or $5 seed packet, spending $70 on a tray was
right.
well worth the investment. And I mean, not all trays are even $70, but it definitely was a mindset shift for me that, okay, I don't have to do it all sometimes.
Yeah, and I think there are certain crops, like, I am never going to grow lisianthus from seed, ever.
No,
And I'm okay with that, I'm at peace with that. More power to
totally.
the person that can do it.
Absolutely. Well, in terms of trying to do too many things, I had a very long list of questions for you, and I know we're at an hour already. So I'm going to skip over a few of them, and I think I'll have to save them and invite you back on the podcast for a future episode. But I would like to know, is there anything that you're especially looking forward to or experimenting with for the rest of this season?
So, I'm like you, I'm actually in the process of planning to build a barn that's flower oriented. And so trying to figure that out, like what's it going to, and I had a long process because the spot where I wanted to locate it was listed as potential wetlands. And so that's another
Mm,
thing that's like a whole other thing that
yes.
most people don't know about. It won't actually be wetlands, but it could be listed as potential wetlands. And then you have to go through a process of, if it's small enough, you like if it's a high tunnel, which is a very small volume building, you can probably go ahead and get it permitted anyway. But for a barn, I had to basically hire, an environmentalist who, on a particular list of people who could come out and do a survey and do soil testing and get permission. So I finally have that lined up, and I have the barn actually on order. And now I'm doing all the fun things that you're probably going through, which is, how do I get my foundation in? What kind of foundation am I going to use? How do I get electrical there? So I have backup, because solar, unless you put in a big battery system, isn't going to run a cooler overnight, and things like that.
Oh, that's so good to know about the cooler. So a solar cannot power a cooler overnight.
Well, you'd have to have a battery system. And so the
Okay.
battery system is actually more expensive and more failure prone, from my understanding, than the panels. And so
Interesting.
currently I have things set up to the solar panels that just need to run during the day. Things like all the fans for our high tunnels are all connected to the solar. And if it's too cloudy that I'm not getting good power, it doesn't really matter, because then it's not too hot in the high tunnels. But for the barn, that's the kind of thing where I really want to make sure I've got 100% power all the time available, even if I can use solar to offset a lot of that.
Gotcha. Okay, that's so helpful. Well, that's really exciting to be planning out your barn. You're a few steps ahead of me. We're
Well,
still
I don't know
finalizing.
about that. I don't know about that, but I keep trying to think like, do I want to drain? Do I not want to drain? And so you wind up kind of worrying that you're going to build it and forget something. But that's been fun. That's been a lot of fun.
Totally. I'm at the decision fatigue, I think, right now, where I've kind of let everything sit for the last month because I'm like, I've just made too many decisions that I can't make another decision right now. But sometimes you just have to pick one and trust that it's the best decision at the time.
Yes. Yes. I think trying to look ahead and not have a lot of regrets is a really important way to go through life, because otherwise you could just agonize about your decisions. And I always think like, did I make a good decision based on the information I had available to me at the time? And if I did, then I don't stress about something I didn't know, because that's inevitable.
I love that perspective. That's such a great mindset. Is there anything that I haven't asked you today that you want our listeners to know?
I think just that I love growing flowers, and I do juggle a lot of different things because I have so many different interests. And I think it is possible on whatever scale works for you to be able to grow flowers at a serious level and really enjoy them. And I often, see discussions about people quitting their day jobs or things like that. And I don't know that you even have to do that. I think you can plunge into the joy of something like flower growing without having to necessarily give up other things in your life. I think you can do it and see where it goes and see where you wind up. And I would just encourage, I love it. I love seeing people growing local flowers. And I would love to see, as a society, that we grow more and more towards local flowers, like the food movement has, grown more towards slow foods and local foods. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Yes, we need more local flowers. There's still so much room for growth in this industry. Before we say goodbye, where can our listeners connect with you online?
Probably the easiest, they can either go to my website, which is dragonsongfarm.com. And I send out probably once or twice a month, I do an email newsletter so people can subscribe to that. I also am pretty active on Instagram. So you can follow Dragonsong Farm on Instagram or Facebook. And I kind of will post just pictures of what we're harvesting or what we're working on.
Perfect. And we'll include show links to all of those in today's episode. Jenny, you have so much wisdom and advice. I thought you'd been farming for so much longer. So it's amazing that you've
Thank
only
you.
been farming for a short time and you've accomplished so much and you're so knowledgeable. I guess that goes back to just diving head first into it and really absorbing all of it. But you're a huge contributor to the ACSF. Now I'm going to mess it up again. I always do this. The Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers. You contribute a lot there. You are always sharing. I see you're very active on Instagram, and it's awesome to see what a local following you have created with your flowers. So thank you so much for joining us today to share about your farm stand, your CSA, your jewelry, and also the legal aspects of flower farming with land and water. I think it's so important for flower farmers to be aware of all of that.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for doing this podcast. I love seeing things that amplify local flower farmers. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, it was such an honor to chat with you, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon.
Great.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank
Have a
you very
great
much.
day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, flower friends, for joining us on another episode of the Backyard Bouquet. I hope you've enjoyed the inspiring stories and valuable gardening insights we've shared today. Whether you're cultivating your own backyard blooms or supporting your local flower farmer, you're contributing to the local flower movement, and we're so happy to have you growing with us. If you'd like to stay connected and continue this blossoming journey with local flowers, don't forget to subscribe to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast. I'd be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave us a review of this episode. And finally, please share this episode with your garden friends. Until next time, keep growing, keep blooming, and remember that every bouquet starts right here in the backyard.